Your company probably calls itself a family. They talk about a culture of trust and autonomy. But if you look at the software installed on company laptops, you'll likely find keystroke loggers, active hour trackers, and surveillance dashboards. We tell our teams we share a grand vision, yet we reduce their actual value to a ranked list of weekly key performance indicators. We preach trust, but we design for suspicion. This contradiction is not a modern glitch. It is the exact dilemma that consumed the brightest minds of ancient China over 2,000 years ago. During the Warring States period, millions were dying as 7 kingdoms spent centuries colliding in a brutal contest for supremacy. To survive that chaos, rulers had to figure out how to manage massive populations of terrified people. And it all boiled down to one core question. Is human nature something you trust with a vision, or something you control with a system? The philosopher Mencius offered a deeply optimistic answer. He argued that human nature is inherently good. To prove it, he asked people to imagine a toddler crawling toward the edge of a deep well. Anyone who sees that child will instantly feel alarm and lunge forward to save them. You don't calculate the reward, and you don't do it to impress the child's parents. Your body moves before your brain can scheme. Mencius argued that every person is born with 4 emotional seeds. Our instinctive compassion grows into benevolence. Our sense of shame develops into justice. Deference becomes social grace, and our ability to judge right from wrong blossoms into wisdom. If we apply this to modern management, Mencius is essentially describing intrinsic motivation. He believed that a leader's job is not to police people, but to trigger internal resonance. When you treat people well and give them a worthy cause, they naturally want to contribute. You see this when people work late because they actually care about the output. The engineers who built early Apple computers didn't sleep under their desks for the overtime pay. The thousands of writers who made Wikipedia the largest encyclopedia in human history did it entirely for free. Mencius spent decades pitching this vision-driven leadership to warlords, but no one bought it. In a world where one mistake meant your kingdom burned, relying solely on the goodness of people's hearts was a risk no ruler was willing to take. A few decades later, another brilliant thinker named Xunzi looked at the same chaos and drew the exact opposite conclusion. He declared that human nature is inherently selfish. Instead of a toddler at a well, look at a newborn infant. When a baby is hungry, it screams. If it wants a toy, it snatches it. We are born demanding our own needs be met, completely indifferent to the exhaustion of everyone around us. Xunzi argued that politeness and morality are artificial constructs. We only become decent adults because society forces us through years of strict education, cultural norms, and rigid rules. To him, selfishness is the engine, and the system is what keeps it driving in the right direction. But this logic has a dangerous edge. Xunzi's own students eventually stripped away his focus on education and weaponized the control aspect. They created legalism, a doctrine that managed human selfishness purely through severe laws and brutal punishments. This ruthless system was highly effective. It built the first unified Chinese empire under Qin Shi Huang. You can see the sheer scale of that obsession with control in the endless, uniform rows of his terracotta army. Thousands of individuals molded into a rigid machine. The problem is that an empire built entirely on the assumption that its people are deceitful quickly becomes an exhausting, oppressive place to live. Absolute control scales well, but it crushes the human spirit in the process. Today, we don't use legalism, but we do use a highly sophisticated version of Xunzi's systemic logic. Economists call it choice architecture. This flowchart illustrates what is known as a nudge. It's the idea that human willpower is notoriously weak. Instead of begging people to do the right thing, you design the physical or digital environment so the correct behavior is automatically the easiest choice. If you put the salads at eye level in the cafeteria and hide the junk food in the back, people eat healthier. If you set employee retirement accounts to opt-in by default, participation skyrockets without anyone having to make a conscious effort. We see it in hospitals, too. Introducing a simple, mandatory pre-surgery checklist reduces surgical errors dramatically. It takes the burden of perfection off a single tired doctor's memory and places it onto the structure itself. This gives us a very practical lens for the workplace. When an employee fails, a good manager doesn't immediately question their moral character. They ask if the workflow was designed in a way that made that mistake inevitable. Sima Qian, the ancient historian who endured immense suffering to compile China's definitive history, understood this tension perfectly. In his massive historical record, he made a deliberate editorial choice. He placed the biographies of Mencius, the idealist, and Xunzi, the cynic, side by side in the exact same chapter. He had lived through the cruelty of an overly rigid state, but he also knew that pure idealism couldn't organize a society. His pairing sends a clear message. Idealism without structure starves in reality, but structure without humanity creates monsters. True wisdom is not choosing one philosophy over the other, but maintaining the uncomfortable tension between the two. Let's bring this back to your desk on a Monday morning. You're looking at a team that seems unmotivated or a project that consistently falls behind. First, pose the Mencius question. Have you failed to give your team a reason to care? Are you demanding output without connecting their daily grind to a resonant, genuine vision? Then ask the Xunzi question. Have you built a broken environment? Are you relying on their raw willpower to overcome convoluted software, vague instructions, and bureaucratic friction? To actually move people forward, you have to do both. You must dream and inspire like Mencius, but engineer and build like Xunzi. That modern corporate contradiction, the trust-based family culture operating alongside strict tracking tools, is not a mistake. It is the eternal, necessary balancing act of true leadership.